Hello, this is Tiffany, and today we have with us John Breunig, the editorial page editor of the Stamford Advocate and Greenwich Time daily news. Hello, John.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your position.
Well, I'm the editorial page editor for two of our Hearst newspapers in Connecticut. We actually have several newspapers under the Hearst flag. I handle editorial pages for the Stamford Advocate and Greenwich Time, but we also work with the Norwalk Hour and the Danbury News Times and the Connecticut Post. So there's a lot of work between the different papers. During my career, I started even as a photographer for a while and a reporter, and I've worked the night desk. I sort of joked at points I went from working an overnight shift where I was the person who put the paper to bed, and then changed to being city editor where I was the person who sort of woke the paper up in the morning. You know, as things have evolved, I do writing. I write editorials for the newspapers. I do a column for the paper. I handle letters to the editor, but I also do production work in putting the pages together. So,
what does your job at Stamford Advocate entail?
It's a little unique in the sense that I'm in charge of two different papers. And if you know those communities, Stamford has been sort of a star of the Gold Coast section of Connecticut for a long time. But it is a city with a lot of diversity. And we have the challenge that this area of the country has the biggest collision of economic disparity in the nation. Greenwich, on the other hand, is one of the wealthiest communities in the country. So there's quite a variety of personalities we deal with day to day.
What are some of the major changes you've seen in journalism over the course of your career?
Well, not surprisingly, I started at our papers in 1986, so it's literally 30 years. The first 10 years when we did production, it was literally edit the page, send it out, wax the back of the piece of paper, put the hot wax, in the paper on another piece of paper, and then, making a line by using a piece of tape. People in that era would all tell you they'd go home with little pieces of tape with various lines on the bottom of their shoes. In 1995, that changed when we went to desktop publishing. So there was the first real technological change. And it would happen around here, if I was covering the tennis tournament or something off-site and I had a laptop of sorts in the late 80s, you had to take the phone, put it into a coupler, hold it down hard on a hard surface, and you could really only read 3 lines on a screen at a time. 2000, the start of the millennium, it was a big deal to give a reporter a cell phone. One of our most reliable reporters just kept losing them because it was not, people still lose their cell phones, but he would just routinely lose a cell phone because it was not second nature to him. Now when a reporter, grabs that phone, I have my phone tucked away here, but goes out with this, we were saying 5-6 years ago, this is like the greatest tool ever invented for a reporter, because if I need to back up and tape record, there's a tape recorder there. If there's breaking news, I can take a photo, I can take a video, I can look things up, I can find my way there. I've seen probably about 10 or 11 years ago, I started seeing, young reporters leave the office when I was city editor, because I'd say, go here. And they wouldn't ask for directions, they would count on the phone. 10 years ago, that was a little harder, and they'd sometimes still get lost. But now, people really count on those devices. But probably the biggest change is just the expectation on a given journalist. That a journalist now, I get very defensive of anybody who criticizes maybe any journalist today, because I stack most of them up to anybody from any era, because they're expected to constantly be filing, constantly be going out and getting news and keeping, feeding the beast that is the internet. using social media, advertising their work. It's just an amazing amount of work. So even though it's changed, I'd argue it's become a lot harder, and it's caused reporters now to have to be a lot more nimble in what they're doing day to day.
Has the speed of information exchange on the internet changed the way professional news is gathered and shared?
Sure. I mean, everything is faster now, right? And, as a senior reporter, senior journalist of sorts, I've always been sensitive to that. It's nothing new. You guys may have recently discussed on the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, talked about how more than 50 years ago, there was this apprehension from some broadcasters to announce the news first because it was that race. That race has become faster than ever, but that is so dangerous because how often do you see, the correction a little while after that says, we're a little fast on the trigger. So I am particularly sensitive to making sure we get the story right, that the facts are right before it goes out. And that's a tug of war because, you're pulling the truth on one side and there's so many people pulling from not just the other side, but from other news organizations, from personal websites, from blogs. Again, 30 years ago, for us to get news out in print meant we had until the next morning to get it right. We didn't have a website. We didn't have a radio station. So if TV beat us or radio beat us, we just tried to do the deeper story for the morning. Now we're in a foot race with TV and radio and blogs and everybody. When the news breaks, we have to get a version of that out. So, you've got to move very fast.
So just curious, how do you get the information? Like, what source do you go to? Do you go to the person, or it's like you're doing research online to get accurate information?
Well, that too. Where do you get the correct information is really the question. When we first started using the internet, in the newsroom, even back it up a little bit before that. Say 25 years ago, if a reporter wrote a story, I think about the fact checking it went through, even at a very small paper like ours. Reporter writes a story, it would go to his city editor, his or her city editor, they would go through the story with them, it would then go to a copy desk. There's a period I'm running the copy desk, and I'd say, okay, you give it a first read. There was certain pressure, expectation that you would have a couple of questions, and then it would go from you to another person. Might go from them to a third person. It would come back to me. I'd read it through. I'd send it out. There was a night editor. But how many eyeballs did I just describe that story going through? There were a lot of people who could check the facts. Right. And if they weren't sure, they were going to the library or they were making phone calls. They were looking for primary sources. Once we saw the internet come in, I remember a relatively, it sounds odd, but relatively early example where I was saying to a young reporter, where did you get this spelling of Britney Spears, right? So I think Britney Spears just turned like 35, so she's a teenager at this point. And I said, just backtrack for me and show me where you got that spelling. They go, no, I went online, I looked at a fan site. I said, type in the name. Well, there was so many different spellings of teenage Britney Spears' name that people thought, I just type it in and I get it and that's going to be correct. Well, that's often not correct. And for many years, even today, I'm not going to instinctively trust Wikipedia to have it right because they've gotten very good about putting their sources on it. It's a great place to start, but you want to then kind of dig deeper. And it raises the question, who do you trust? Ultimately, you want to trust the primary source because people are just sloppy with names, with spelling, with details, with initials. So as best as I ever can, you want to touch it. You want to touch the person, not literally, but you want to verbally touch that person and say, can I please double check? I've always, when I interviewed people, if I ask for the spelling of your name, you have an unusual spelling. I could write it down and guess, and you might not instinctively correct me.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, is it this? And you'd say, yeah, that sounds right. Or I'd ask you how to spell it. But I always hold my notebook up or hand it to the person and say, please look at it. This is my one shot. I don't want to get that wrong. So, yeah, it's important. If I misspell a name, the reader's going to know, well, maybe he's a little sloppy with the facts. So why would they trust anything else I checked?
Right. How do you see the business of journalism evolving in the future?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? Oddly, lately I've been pondering, what does a President Trump administration mean for journalism? Mm. And it's too early to tell, but in some ways I'm seeing little flashes of inspiration that people are feeling emboldened that the primary job of a journalist is to challenge, right? To double check, from the primitive double check measure. The old chestnut, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. Double check every fact. I'm kind of hopeful that we will see people thinking this is a president, this is an administration, as all are in many ways, that need to be checked, that need to be challenged. I'd like to maybe naively think there can be kind of a rise in young people who say, I want to take that challenge. I want to ask the tough questions, do the deep research. I think we're evolving past, I love social media. I've noticed personally that if I tweet something, I was thinking of this the other day, that I tweeted two things on the same day. I tweeted a column I had done about what high school students I talked to had to say about President-elect Trump. About half an hour later, I tweeted, I was going to do a column on this, the fact that I was in a store with my 5-year-old, and I simply tweeted, parental advice, never tell your child you lick that, now we have to buy it. Well, you can kind of guess which got more hits on my tweet, but I suddenly had all these parenting followers for the parenting advice, but also all these sort of political followers for the other tweet. But I'm starting to find people are engaged, not just, and again, I love that Twitter sort of forces you to synthesize ideas into a few characters, but people are starting to file things that are, or send me op-eds that are actually quite long and thought out and deeper. And I do think there's a thirst for that remains. And I think the next generation of journalists are interested in kind of digging deeper and knowing that just kind of the race to file as many short stories or bursts or tweets or things a day, the thing that will last is the investigation, the discovery, the finding things that nobody else has. So in that way, I'm very hopeful.
Thank you for joining us and sharing your insights on Journalism Today.
Thank you.
This is Tiffany at Sacred Heart University. Good night, and thank you for watching.